So this video is just going to be a video on some of the information we got from ModMattK in the data live stream not too long ago. Some of the stuff we saw in that video is pretty alarming to me. If you think I'm wrong about any of this, feel free to post down in the comments, correct me, discuss these things. Maybe something can be done about it before it gets too bad. So there's three main points that I want to talk about. So first of all is the GP in the game, gold pieces. Second of all is the items in the game. And then third is just kind of that stuff in unison, how they work together and relate to each other. The three main problems I'm seeing from this are if you're not continuously making money, your bank value is decreasing at a rapid rate. Also, status items are becoming less and less valuable and losing their status. Basically, it's raising the bar to where everyone has the same gear. There is no special gear that is unique and rare, and it's becoming harder and harder for new players to get up to the average GP wealth value that an average player has these days. So I'll explain why I think that those three things are happening. First, we're going to get into the GP. So we were given the amount of GP in the game at the end of 2016 and now at the end of 2017, as well as the platinum tokens for 2017. We know that there was less than 1.8 billion tokens in the game at the end of 2016, but we don't know the exact number of tokens for 2016, so I just made an estimate for that. So here is the value of tokens plus GP in the game. End of 2016, I have 11.5 trillion, and for 2017, we have 19.9 trillion. The 2016 is how much GP we made from the beginning of the game, in February 2013, all the way up until the end of 2016. So that was 4 years it took to make the 11.5 trillion GP. And in just the last year alone, we have made we've almost doubled that. We're almost at 20 trillion now. So if we have GP coming into the game, that's not necessarily a bad thing if we have a lot of new players. And we have had quite a few more players than before, but it's not enough to make up the GP increase. Here's a graph showing the game hours. I got the game hours. That's basically taking the average players online at any given time over a year, and then timesing that by the hours in the year. And then I also have the GP generated for that time. So from 2013, the beginning of the game, until the end of 2016, I got these player numbers from Crystal Math Labs, which has been tracking the players since the start of the game. So there was 1,240.1 million hours in the game, and 11.5 trillion GP made in that time. For 2017, we had 525.6 million game hours and 8.4 trillion generated. So there's a huge increase of GP being made for how much time is being put into the game, how many players, that sort of thing. So the increase in GP coming into the game is not simply due to more players. And just here's a quick graph showing the GP per account. If you were to split the GP in the game over the average players online, considerably higher at the end of 2017 than it was at 2016. So what does this all mean? All this extra GP that's coming into the game that we've established is happening. It means GP value is going down. If you had 10 mil in your bank, you quit for all of 2017 and you came back, that 10 mil is now worth a considerably less amount than it was when you quit. Your bank just dropped in value massively. Because there's so much more of it in the game, it's just naturally not worth as much. There's more for each player to have than before. So that's a pretty big problem. Your bank value is just dropping. If you have a pile of coins sitting around, it is losing its value very quickly, which is a pretty big problem in my opinion. I don't know why you would want to have your coins just losing value if you have them sitting there for a long time. If you quit for a while, because they're losing value, that means it's going to take more of them to buy something. So prices will generally rise when there's lots of GP coming into the game like this. So here's a quick visual example of kind of what happens with inflation. We have more gold coming into the game, which means there's more gold to be attached to items, which means prices will go up. Generally, there are other factors that factor into the price of an item, but if we have inflation, that will generally make items go up in price. And then you could say, well, if items go up in price, that means I get more money from that activity where I get that item. But the problem is the price of most items all go up. So really your buying power doesn't really go up much because everything else will be more expensive as well. Inflation is also dependent on the items coming into the game, so not just the GP. Our GP is definitely increasing at a very fast rate, but we also have lots of items coming to the game, which is kind of why we are not seeing items rise in value, and I'll get more into that a little bit later. And when GP becomes worth less, it hurts parts of the game. Anything that relies on alch value, that's getting worse and worse. So Jagex often put in money-making methods that rely on alch value so that they can't go below a certain threshold. So people say that that method's always going to be good, but the problem with that is instead of items losing their value because people are doing it, the GP itself is losing its value. So while it may stay the same GP per hour, that GP itself is worth less. So really the money-making method is still going down in value. If we continue on this trend, things like Zora that have a high reliance on alch value, which was once amazing money, are going to be forgotten money-making methods because the GP is going to be worth so little. This also changes some of the skilling construction, which is pretty reliant on the cost to turn logs into planks. That's kind of the main factor in the price of planks. 100 mil to get 99 construction in 2013 is very different from 100 mil or maybe 120 mil to get 99 construction now. It basically devalues skills. That's a way smaller amount of money now compared to how much it was back in 2013. So essentially the skill has gotten much easier. So lots of money coming in like that. Bad. Next, we're going to move on over to the items coming to the game, which is also extremely bad. And this is kind of creating an illusion. What's happening between the GP and the items is kind of creating an illusion where people think their bank value is staying close to the same, but really it's just dropping so quick it's hard to believe. So before I go into why I think lots of these items coming into the game is bad, I'm just going to go over the information that we got. ModMattK did give us how many of each boss was killed in 2017. So from that information, since we have the confirmed drop rates for pretty much every rare drop, I was able to get this information. It's not going to be exact because of randomness, but it should be extremely close. So this is the amount of items that came into the game in 2017, which is an insane amount, starting off with the smallest amount of items. The first graph, it's ranging between the LE, only a few hundred, up to 5,000 area for some of these items. These are items off some of the less popular bosses. The next graph, we see quite a big increase in how many items are coming in. And some of these items like D-Chains you can get off Dust Devils and other parts of the game. But what I'm showing here is purely off of the bosses. So D-Chain is off Calphite Queen plus what is off of Thermonuclear boss. These occults are purely off the Thermi boss. It's not counting the ones you get off the little minions, which is probably where the majority of occults come into the game. So really this is probably only a fraction of how many came in. The third graph, we're getting into DKs and stuff, and it's just insane how many items are coming into the game from these bosses in just the last year alone. And then here is the raid items. They gave us how many twisted bows are in the game, and from that information we are able to pretty accurately find out how many of the other items are in the game. What's not shown here is barrel items. There was 877,000 new barrel items in 2017 alone. That number is insane. That just far exceeds every other item, so that's why I didn't put it into a graph, because it would just dwarf everything. So now let's get into why this is a problem. Why is this bad that all these new items are coming into the game? We don't have a sync for these items, so there's very few leaving the game. Maybe if someone quits or is banned with these items, that's pretty much the only way they're getting taken out of the game. So these are just stacking up on each other and never being taken out of the game. And when that happens, it's going to cause the prices to drop. And they're going to continue to drop and drop until they hit their alch value, which is not a good thing. So not only will this drop the price or the value of an item, it also raises the average gear level of players, and it takes away that wow or like that status symbol of items. Like they're no longer seen as a cool or a high status item. In 3 years from now, when there's 20,000 more twisted bows in the game, it's not going to be a big deal to have a twisted bow because there's so many in the game. That status of an item comes from there being very few compared to how many people want that item. And as you put more and more in the game, that just drops the status of that item down further and further until everyone in the game has it and it's no longer has any status at all. Every noob who starts the game, they can play an hour and they'll have that high status item, or what used to be a high status item, because there's just so many in the game everywhere, everyone has one. And in games like this, you need those status items. So not only does it lower the price of items and remove any status of items as time goes on, it also creates a large gap between the rich and the poor, because the way most people make money in the game is through PVM or skilling and gaining these items. They go and acquire these items, and that's how they raise their bank value. The more of these there are in the game, that means when you're going and acquiring these, the less value they're going to have, which means your money-making method is going to go down. So this creates a huge gap in the wealth of players, because when a brand new item or brand new boss comes out, those items aren't prolific and all over in the game, so they're going to be worth quite a bit. And so the players that are high level and can go and do those bosses the day of release, they're going to be able to make quite a bit of money, while lower level players are left doing these old money making methods, getting these old items that there's a billion of in the game and they're not worth anything. So it makes it really hard for new players to make much money when everything is just worthless. At the beginning of the game, the first year or two, you could see like the richest stakers, like people are just like at crazy amounts. There were tons of different money making methods where you could go and do that money making method, and within hundreds of hours, possibly thousands, you could have as much as those insanely rich stakers. You could have like the average bank value within just a few hours with tons of different methods. If you were to look at that now, the time it takes to get to the average bank value with most methods is going to be a lot longer than it was at the beginning of the game. And to get to those huge heights that really rich stakers are at, it's way longer time than it used to be. That's because the money making methods are going down, because the items that you're acquiring from those methods there's just too many in the game and they're becoming worth less and less. Raids is still pretty new, so you can still make good money from that, but give that a couple years, and when there's a ton of items from that in the game, you're going to be making less from that as well. And really, the only thing you're left with is brand new bosses when they come out. That's where you can actually make some decent money. Skills, at the beginning of the game, skills were very profitable. They were very competitive with PVM, but the thing is, we don't get any new big skilling money-making methods that come to the game. So they're all left to just slowly die and become worth less and less in the game. Rune crafting, that used to be amazing, but because there's so many runes in the game, so many coming in, there's too many, they can't be worth as much. So now this brings me to the third part of this video, kind of talking about the GP in the game and the items kind of in unison and how they kind of relate to each other. Rising, dropping, those things are relative. They need something to be relative to gauge them. And that's kind of hard when both the GP and the items are crashing. They seem like they're not crashing because they're both crashing at the same time. So relative to each other, they're pretty stable, but they're really crashing. When I say crashing, the thing I'm going to say relative to, if we had some items in the game, let's say that was limited to 100, there was only 100 in the game, there's always only 100, never more, never less, there's always the same demand. So this imaginary item, relative to this imaginary item, they are crashing big time. It would be shooting up in price because GP is going down the drain, while there is no more of this item coming into the game. That's where we'd really see the effect of what's going on with GP right now. So here's a quick little picture I think kind of depicts some of the problem with this. 2014 took me 25 hours of high level new PVM to get this Bandos. 2017 took me 5 hours of new high level PVM to get this Bandos. And the reason for this is because the Bandos went down in value. The new high level PVM is more money per hour than it was back in 2014 because there's more money in the game. If we suddenly cut Bandos sets down to like 1k in the game instead of like the current close to 80k in the game, the prices would skyrocket. They would be worth hundreds of mils, and the two pictures would probably be a lot more equal than they are now. It's because we have 80k sets in the game that this is possible. And they showed us how much, if everyone sold all of the items in the entire game on the GE, how much they'd be worth, and that was 73 trillion. We only have 19.9 trillion in gold, which means we are generating a lot more value in items than we are pure GP, which means we are in deflation. Even though GP is becoming worth less and less, items are still generally going to go down because there's just so many items being generated into the game. And it's pretty crazy. Raids has only been out for less than a year, 11 months, and T-Bow is already the highest valued item in the economy besides coins and platinum tokens. It is 3.39 trillion, whereas second place was Tassie's, sitting at like 1.8 trillion or something like that. So those are some pretty big problems, and as far as solutions, we definitely need to see some item sinks, very large item sinks in the game, as well as pretty significant GP sinks. I don't really have any great ideas on what we could do for item sinks or GP sinks, but I'm sure there are some people in the community that could come up with something pretty good. But I think we do need to have some sort of sinks in the game before this gets even worse. It would also be extremely helpful if we had some limited items in the game. RS3 has party hats and holiday items, and those would be amazing if we had those in the game. If you're going to quit the game for a couple of years, you can just buy one of those, and when you come back, your bank value should be kind of close to what it was when you quit. Because if GP becomes devalued, there's a bunch of inflation, your item is going to go up in price, and you're not going to lose out by holding a big stack of coins that becomes worthless. And we don't have to have huge, giant, super expensive holiday items like they have in RS3. I mean, they could have an item that's capped at, 100,000 of them in the game. That's quite a few, or maybe even more, but there's a cap on the item. So we're not getting a bunch of them coming into the game. You can buy that and have some sort of reliability in it holding its value. As we're headed now, I think we're going to be looking like RuneScape 3 here pretty soon, which is not a good thing. The economy of old school RuneScape has been a pretty strong point about the game. Why it was an awesome game, so it's kind of sad to see it going this direction. So I know there are other people in the community also concerned about this stuff, so hopefully there's enough concern and enough people that Jagex will do something about this. But yeah, that's pretty much what I had to say about this. So thank you guys all for watching, and see you sometime.